Welcome to the Florida Realtors Ultimate Short Sale Guide. This guide is good for listing agents or buyer's agents in Florida looking to learn more about short sales. A little bit about me. My name is Elizabeth, and I'm the managing broker for Star Bay Realty, which is a 100% commission real estate brokerage. There are no monthly fees, and you only pay $250 per transaction. Okay, so your seller has contacted you stating that they want to sell their home and they haven't been able to make their mortgage payments. So they know that they're in default and they want to go ahead and do the short sale process. They've heard about it. So the first thing that I would do is tell your seller, go ahead and request a payoff statement. They can do this by logging onto their portal where they usually make their mortgage payments and put in a payoff statement request for about 45 days from the date that you are requesting. When you get the payoff statement, if the amount is much higher than probably what you can net after the sale of their home, then it's probably best to go ahead and do a short sale. Now, most likely the seller has already reached out to their lender for payment assistance to see if there's anything they can do to make their monthly payments lower. If they haven't already done so, I would advise them to start with that, as doing a short sale will affect their credit for at least 4 years. So make sure they are aware of that. If they want to still go ahead and proceed with the short sale, then they can go ahead and contact the loss mitigation or home retention department of their from their mortgage. And usually, the most mortgages won't even consider a short sale unless the seller is already in default. At least 3 months they haven't been paying their mortgage payments. Now, once you start the communication with them, the lender will tell them what the next step is. For an FHA loan, usually they will say they need to do an appraisal first, and after that, they will issue an approval to participate. For conventional loans, they may say, go ahead and contact a realtor and list your home for sale. And then after that, we will review and order an appraisal. And then the last thing I want to make sure you tell your seller is that they are advised to obtain legal counsel. The reason being is a lot of these private mortgages or sometimes even conventional mortgages, they're you want to make sure that even if they do a short sale, that they're off the hook for the balance of their mortgage and that their creditors cannot still come after them for the balance or what wasn't paid for the mortgage. But I do know that a lot of sellers cannot afford legal counsel, and so they can still be advised to still reach out to legal counsel and see if they can work out a payment plan. But if the seller chooses not to obtain legal counsel, that is totally up to them. But as a realtor, it is our responsibility to advise them to do so. So next, you want to find out what's going on with the property, what other liens are on the property. Keep in mind that not only the primary mortgager can foreclose on the property, but anybody. There are other venues that could possibly foreclose on the property. For example, the HOA, if they have past due payments and it's been more than a year, then they might be seeking to foreclose on the property. Have the property taxes been paid? Is there a solar panel lien or any other utility lien, mechanical liens? So ask the seller, hey, are you in default? Did you open any junior mortgages? And to find out what's going on so that way you can get a better picture of what's owed on the property. The next step is for an FHA loan, which is the one that I had personally done for the short sale. The seller had an FHA loan. They issued an approval to participate form. So this form was sent to the seller, and once they receive it, they have once I, once it's sent, they have 10 days to sign it. If they don't sign it within those 10 days, then the whole process has to start all over again. So you do want to make sure that if there's more than one seller, they all sign this approval to participate form and send it back to the lender. This has to be a wet signature, which was the one mistake that we made is they do not accept electronic signatures. So they have to manually sign it and then you have to scan it in and send it to them. Now, this approval to participate will show what the listing price, minimum listed price has to be, and has all the other requirements on here. Now, did we wait for this approval to participate to list the listing? No, we went ahead and listed it, and once we received the approval to participate, luckily, the listed price was higher than the minimum listing price requirement on the form. Uh, you can wait, but I didn't, and you can go ahead and have your listing. As long as you have your listing agreement, you can go ahead and list it. So for conventional loans, most of the time you will go ahead and just list it right away, and then they will do the appraisal afterwards. Okay, the listing requirements. So the approval to participate is going to have all of your listing requirements. For this particular one, they stated that once the seller signed the list approval to participate form, they had to list within 7 days. And the commission cap was 6%. So you want to make sure your listing agreement incorporates that. The listing has to be active on the MLS for a minimum of 15 days before any offers can be accepted. And also, the listing agreement must have a specific cancellation clause, which is specifically written right here in your approval to participate form. Since we had already had the listing agreement, we just made a modification to the listing agreement to make sure they were in compliance with everything that the lender required. Another thing to keep in mind is just to be prepared to let their seller know that if there are any other additional dues owed on the property, that they will be required to pay those. And if they are not able to pay that, then we need to make sure we write that into the contract that the buyer will pay for that. So we went ahead and got the HOA statement, and we submitted a preliminary closing statement to the lender. And the lender came back and said that they would only pay up to 1 year HOA dues. And any dues that are owed after 1 year would be the seller's responsibility. Now, the seller could not pay for that. So we went ahead and wrote it into the contract for the buyer to pay for that, and also for the buyer to pay for the HOA estoppel fee and deed preparation cost. Also, when you submit writing entering into a contract with the buyer, you want to make sure that the short sale approval contingency is attached to the contract. This is a standard Florida Realtors addendum that is used for the as-is residential contract. And it just states that, this contract is contingent upon the seller's lender approving this, and then waiving the balance that's owed on the home. Another few points to mention that was also on the approval to participate form is that it must be an arm's length transaction. Nobody can be related to the seller. So the agent cannot be related, the buyer can't be related, the buyer's agent cannot be related to the buyer or have any, benefit for that, working with them. Also, these things take time. So make sure that the buyer and the seller are aware that, it could take 3 or 4 months for the contract to finally get approved and all the numbers to go through. Also, when you are finally receive your contract and your offer from the buyer, before you submit it to the lender, make sure you have everything that you need. So they're going to want the official contract. They're going to want the closing statement. So the preliminary closing statement, the HUD, showing all the fees and all whoever's getting paid. Everything needs to be on there. So make sure your title company includes everything, and your notary fees, the HOA estoppel fees, deed preparation fees, commissions, everything must be on there so that the net amount is correctly reflected. If it changes later on, like for example, they approve the contract based on that net amount, but it changes later, it could be an issue to get them to approve any variances. So you want to make sure you have all the numbers right away. They're also going to request a copy of your listing agreement and an HOA statement so they can see, verify that against what's on the closing statement. Now, this just goes into the approval to participate will show like, hey, these are the requirements for us to approve the short sale. But just because you don't have those requirements, you can still submit it to see if they will accept it. So, for our case, were not able to get 88% of the appraised value under contract, but they still went ahead and approved our contract. So we just want to go into some samples of the forms that I had been talking about. So, um, first of all, this is a short sale approval contingency form. It's called CR7. So this is a form that you want to make sure that you add is attached to your as-is residential contract for sale. And then this is the approval to participate form. And this is a form that we received after the lender had approved us for listing the home. It states all the requirements on here for listing the home and when the closing must occur by. Um, and then they also included, I just want to point this out, they also have their own pre foreclosure sale addendum. So this is the lender's addendum that they created that they want attached to the contract. They won't even review the contract unless this is attached. So you want to make sure the seller goes ahead and puts their wet signature on here so that it's ready for any potential buyer to go ahead and sign this. And it must be submitted along with the contract when requesting the contract approval. Then once we received the contract approval, they received the preliminary HUD, so they had an estimate of how much they would receive after, the junior lien, the commissions, etcetera, and then they put on here a deadline for the closing date. If the closing needs to be extended, even if both parties agree to extend the closing date, the lender also needs to approve, so you do need to make sure that you apply for a variance, if the closing needs to be extended, and they might not approve it, so keep that in mind as well too. Now, after we had the final numbers, we submitted, all of that we had submitted the final HUD for final approval. So this contract approval is just a preliminary approval saying that they do approve the contract pending the final HUD. Once the final HUD was received, they sent us a closing worksheet, and it stated what the closing procedure was to be and the final deadline for the closing, as well as, where the funds should be submitted to as well. There was another form that needed a wet signature from the seller and from the, listing agent as well. And, they did require us to send copies of the wire confirmation. So, um just to go a recap, for FHA and conventional short sales, there are some minor variances, and the main thing is, the thing that got me was the wet signatures because that delayed a lot of the processes. So going forward, just make sure you get wet signatures on anything from your lenders. And, uh, I guess a side note is a key takeaway also is when you're putting your listing on the MLS, just go ahead and make sure you have all these addendums already uploaded so that any buyer who potentially wants to submit an offer, they can go ahead and upload those as well too. So you're not wasting time back and forth waiting for all these additional forms to be uploaded. Yeah, so that was our little take about short sales. Hope you learned some. We have a detailed blog which goes more into detail, step-by-step guide on our website. So feel free to go to our website, starbayrealty.com. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out.